Peace. Islam. Shikamaga Alamasi Hill. Coming at y'all live. Deep down. Alamasi Arabian country. Just want to tap in real quick. Do the knowledge. We'll expand on this in a later drop, but kind of do the knowledge on kind of what really happened as far as a lot of the so-called religion that so-called the freedmen mass kind of adopted in Reconstruction. We're going to say the so-called freedmen, you know what I'm saying? And, we're going to do the knowledge on why, how the center of the community, a so-called community, largely post-1865, why it, everything was kind of centered around, the preacher. And we all, just, again, we in times of judgment. So we got to kind of just look at what worked and what didn't work. And unfortunately, there was a certain point in time when, you did have a lot of real so-called pastors and preachers and all of that were, that was about their life. You know what I'm saying? Because, a lot of them held on to their, even if you're going to deal with the Baptists, a lot of people initially were dealing with, might have been dealing with the Seventh-day Baptists, dealing kind of with the old religion. But we kind of have to do the knowledge to the missionary Baptist movement and a lot of the missionary churches and a lot of the AME churches and whatnot that showed up all across the South post-1865 around the time of Reconstruction, and really do the knowledge to what really happened. Because again, after a war, the war between 1812 and 1865 was a real war. A lot of stuff got blown up, devastated. It was a real situation. It was serious business. It wasn't just some Rudy Poo stuff. It was a real war. Things got blown up. Things were devastated. You know what I'm saying? So, in an aftermath of a war, a lot of especially the side that kind of didn't prevail, a lot of times people are rounded up and put in camps. Soldiers are killed off. A lot of people are disappeared and eliminated. The rebels and the belligerents who didn't prevail. Things happen to these people. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of times, the losing side, generally, they're rounded. They're rounded up and put into war camps and stuff like that. That happens. Well, the end of the Civil War was really no exception. You know what I'm saying? So, when the Confederacy lost, it was essentially a ceasefire, but the Confederacy had to make all the cessions, really. So, what you think happened to the Confederate population, which was majority Mississippi? You know what I'm saying? Don't get it twisted. These people were the majority of the Confederate constituency was Mississippi. It was of my phenotype. You know what I'm saying? Our phenotype. You know what I mean? So, what do you think happened to these people? Now, in the history, they're going to tell you about some contraband camps and all of that where they had the freed slaves. But we've already done the knowledge to the fact that when they say it's a freed slave, this is a code word for someone who either willingly converted to the new form of Christianity or was forced through warfare to, they were a forced convert through warfare. So they were former Muslims or Yahudi, and they were, new Christians. That's what they call a freedman. You know what I'm saying? Essentially, you lost your old culture or forced to give up your old culture. You know what I mean? And now you're free. We're freeing you. We're freeing you to come be up under us. You know what I'm saying? Because essentially your old culture is a slave culture. Because you actually have to follow laws. You actually have to follow leadership. You actually have to go through things. You have to be accountable in these cultures. You know what I mean? Like, there's no usury. The men lead the families. It's for real. It's a real culture. You actually have to pay your debts. We do apprenticeships. We do 7-year indentured contracts where you may come work for me on my land, and then after that contract is up, and then that's what they call slavery, because they can't manage that type of system because it's based on merit, it's based on honesty, it's based on honor. You know what I'm saying? They can't manage that culture. So to them, that's a slave culture because you have to be held accountable. See, in the other culture, you ain't got to necessarily be held accountable because you can go confess because somebody died for your sins. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not really, again, not knocking nobody's religion or culture, but that's not the indigenous Mississippian religion or culture. It never was. So we're going to do the knowledge to all of a sudden after 1865, why all of a sudden you see all of the, and you can do the knowledge to it. And as we travel around, we may run across a lot of markers. After 1865, you started to see so many so-called missionary churches popping up all over the South. You know what I'm saying? And we're going to do the knowledge to why that is. But first, let's do the knowledge to the Free African Society that was founded in 1787 in Philadelphia by Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. Now, these people, they were the founders of the AME Church, but if you do the knowledge to this whole situation, what this is these are people who are kind of more, they are kind of abandoning. They're of the same phenotype that us Mississippians are, but these are people who are trying to leave the old culture behind and go modern. You know what I mean? The whole modern corporate, New Testament culture and demonstration that they were pushing. These were kind of some of the first people to really of our phenotype to really adopt that. And again, another thing we got to do the knowledge to is a lot of that culture, the Back to Africa movement and the Free African Society and all of that, because that's not Mississippi. That's not an indigenous culture. The Back to Africa and the African American, that's not Mississippian. That's not American. You know what I'm saying? We have our own Moorish, Muslim, Barbary culture in America. It has nothing to do with no Africa. It just doesn't, man. If anything, the only thing we got to do with Africa is the only thing we got to do with so-called Africa, because Africa's not even a real continent, you know what I'm saying? It's part of Asia. But the only thing we really got to do with Africa is from the northern, is the western and northern parts, the Barbary coast and all of that. That was our turf in Africa. That's who we really did it with. Like the Tuaregs people, the Hausa, the Muslims, the real Muslims, those are our kinfolks in Africa. You know what I'm saying? The Moorish, the old Moorish Egyptians, because back in the day, Egypt was Moorish. If you look at old pictures in the early 1900s of so-called Egypt, of people in so-called what's called Egypt today, over across the way, these people were copper-colored, and they wore fezzes and turbans. You know what I'm saying? That's who it was. But we ain't never been on no RBG. That's not our culture. Rocking African medallions and all that, that's not our culture. But I tell you whose culture that really is and who really pushes that demonstration, not right or wrong. But a lot of people who kind of generally come from the Caribbean, that's their culture. You know what I'm saying? They're more akin to the African, Back to Africa, Free African Society, New School Christian culture. So it makes sense that the Free African Society was, because the Free African Society and the AME demonstration, the new Christian demonstration, the Baptist demonstration, they were trying to push on so-called African Americans or blacks, because these people, all they were assimilationist people who were losing their, they were basically abandoning. These people might have been descended from old noble bloodlines or whatever, but they were abandoning all of that, and they were assimilating into this kind of peasant style system that they were setting up. So these people they didn't want to be Muslims. They didn't want to be they didn't want to be Yahudi. They didn't want to be the old school nobles. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to come into this new school Baptist type of demonstration where there's really not no real nobility. I mean, it is what it is. It just is what it is. So that that Free African Society and the AME, the African American churches and the missionary churches, it started off in the Northeast, because again, we've already talked about how the fact that the Moors and the Barbaries demonstration, the Iroquois out there in the Northeast, they kind of lost their way a long way before the rest of the country did. You know what I'm saying? They did a lot of integrating. That's why in the late 1800s they had allowed so many people to come in and bleach themselves out, and they were giving up their culture so much that all of the invasion to the rest of the country always filters through like New York and the East Coast, because the Iroquois and these people, they lost their way a long time ago. They gave up their rights, signed over their rights, and abandoned their Barbary Mississippian roots a long time ago. So all of the silliest foreign stuff always filters through the Northeast, and the whole the whole AME. Well, again, I'm not saying right or wrong, but that whole demonstration, that's not really an American demonstration, because America did not deal with New Testament so-called Christianity. It just didn't. The whole country is old school Muslim and old school Yahudi. That's just what it is. That's indigenous American culture. And again, all academic demonstrations, even though we don't follow that, backs that up. So the AME demonstration, and the missionary Baptist demonstration, so-called Black African American church demonstration, that started off in the Northeast, and it kind of filtered. That started off in the Northeast in the late 1700s, and it kind of filtered I guess, a little ways through the Midwest. Because, you know, after the war, 1812, that broke down a Confederacy in the Midwest. Because the Confederacy is hostile to that type of demonstration. The Confederacy is hostile because the Confederacy is Yehudi and Moslem. You know what I'm saying? Mainly Moslem. So we're hostile to all of that stuff. You know what I'm saying? So, but you will find out if you do the knowledge to it that the whole missionary AME demonstration that did not make it to the South whatsoever. Because they're going to give you the narrative that there were some free, that all the Southerners were slaves, so they couldn't practice their religion. That's again, these people were not allowed in the South. You know what I'm saying? They were not allowed. Like if you were running around with that crazy peasant demonstration, you was not allowed no right. You had no rights in the South because the South and the mid we were noble down here. You know what I mean? We didn't do that peasant. We didn't do that peasant demonstration. We were noble down here. You got held accountable. We were the Old Testament 10 Commandments culture in the South, in the Midwest and all of that. In the Confederacy, that's what we were, the 10 Commandments. We were old school. You know what I'm saying? It was real. We really them people. You know what I'm saying? And nobody dies for your sins. You get to confess your sins. No, you held accountable right away in the Confederate culture. You know what I mean? That's just what it was. But it's interesting that if you do the knowledge, all of these AME or whatever churches started popping up in the South after 1865 during Reconstruction. And if you do the knowledge, you'll find out that the Union, after the war, when they were setting up when they had all these federal troops downstairs, they did allow a lot of pastors from the AME church to come down and set up situations all around the South. Now, let's do the knowledge to what really happened. Now, if you look at pictures of our people, and again, we know about the fake slave narrative. If you look at pictures of our people, the Southern people, during the antebellum era, or even in the Reconstruction era, you're going to see a lot of pictures of our people, especially the women, walking around with long dresses with their heads wrapped. You know what I'm saying? They wore their heads. They dressed like Muslims. Real talk, like they fake that fake Angie Mama nonsense. That's what they wanted to. Again, they wanted to get us to get away from that modest old school culture. So they called it the slave culture, and they kind of gave it a bad rap. But if you look at old school pictures of our people, back in those days, everybody was wrapped up, everybody was garbed up. They were working the fields, but everybody had their head wraps. You'll see a lot of pictures with brothers with vests, long clothes, and bucket hats, a fezzes on, turbans, and wraps around their head. If you really do the research and do the knowledge and look, you're gonna find pictures of our people dressing like Muslims, dressing like Yehudi in the South. Now, if you look at pictures probably around, Southern people, our people all over the country around the 1880s, around 1879, around that time, you're gonna see our people dressing totally different. I mean, we were still conservative, but we dressed totally different. No, the sisters didn't really have their heads wrapped like that. You know what I'm saying? They was wearing the church hats. You know what I mean? Like the brothers had the suit and ties and the top hats. You know what I mean? Looking real, looking way European. Like you can tell that they shut that culture down in the South. And a big way they was able to do it, they call it these contraband camps and these Christian re-education schools. You know what I'm saying? Just like you got over in China right now, they taking the Uyghur people and they putting them in these so-called re-education camps so they can stop being Muslims. They want them to conform to to the communism or whatever. They did the same thing to our people in Reconstruction. They forced the people, of course, they killed off a lot of the old Confederate men and soldiers in the so-called contraband camps, because all contraband camps were captured Confederates and their families. So they put women, children in all these camps, in these re-education camps. They were probably killing off the men, you know what I'm saying? Anybody who was a soldier, you got murked. And the only way you could keep your status or whatever was, you had to conform or whatever, give up information or whatever. A lot of people just didn't make it. They had whole camps where they would round up old Creeks, old Confederates and all that, and they would starve them out. I heard there was a camp out in Kansas where they starved like thousands of Creeks, thousands, a contraband camp out there that they starved thousands of people out. They just didn't feed them and let them starve to death. All type of atrocities. I mean, it is what it is. It's war. So if you lose the war, it is what it is. You know what I'm saying? We're not saying, we just trying to speak facts. So they put a lot of our people, especially the children, in these re-education camps in these Christian schools, these new Christian schools, the AME schools. So that's why you see our people dressing, totally acting with the whole they basically forced the pork eating, you know, a lot of that culture and the pay, you know, that more of that different culture on our people. The South, the Confederates were not, all of that culture that's new to the South. That's relatively new to the Midwest. Because again, this is old Confederate Creek territory. We were Muslims down south. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. But when they forced these people into these re-education schools, that's when you got the whole like if you go into the you know, the early 1900s, the late 1800s, you got this new Christian so-called Negro. You know what I'm saying? And you can just tell the church hats. Nobody has their heads wrapped no more. Nobody's really looking noble. Nobody, you know what I mean? These people just look like regular. You know what I mean? Like they done lost their nobility. That was forced on a lot of these people because again, the Confederacy lost. So just due to knowledge to how many so-called missionary churches. And again, nothing wrong with church. We know we've always been a religious people. Temples, churches, mosques, we've always had that. You know what I'm saying? But we want to drive it home. America, the old school America was not dealing with this New Testament doctrine. It just wasn't. And it definitely wasn't necessarily dealing with the Catholic doctrine. We were old school Yehudi and Moslem. You know what I'm saying? Ishmael, Israelite. You know, it is what it is. Saracen, Sarah, what is it? Jacob, Ishmael, those are our demonstrations. You know what I'm saying? We are old school. So just, we don't want to do knowledge to a lot of the re-education camps and the reason why our people were kind of, you know, forced into this new school Christianity. It's not indigenous to the old South. So we're getting a lot of that up out the paint. So just do the knowledge to the missionary churches and do the knowledge to a lot of the turbans and all that disappearing in the late 1800s. All of a sudden, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, that's peace. I'll tap back in with y'all later.